Hi scholars, let's look at TEK 4.2F. I can compare and order decimals using concrete and visual models to the hundredths. So before I show you how to compare... Okay, so first thing you need to know is there are two place values after the decimal. Now when you get to 5th grade, the 5th grade TEK has thousandths, but we're just going to focus on tenths and hundredths. And the way I tell my students is that suppose you had 45 cents. What's a way you could represent it? And so they'll tell me like 4 dimes and 5 pennies. I know there's many other ways. You can do 8 nickels and 5 pennies, but for the purpose of this lesson, we're going to stick with dimes and pennies. And so when I tell them about dimes, I tell them like, well, how many dimes does it take to make $1? Or what is a dime worth? And they told me, they explained to me that 1 dime is 10 cents, and this 1 dime is like 1/10 of $1. Because it takes 10 dimes to make $1. So when you have 1 dime, you have 1/10 of $1. So then we relate that tenth to this as the tenths place. That when you have 45 cents, that's 4 dimes and 5 pennies. So you have 4/10 of $1 or 40 cents in this place value. So we connect that with that. And so because it's called tenths, we use the tens block to represent tenths. Now when you get questions about place value for decimals, it will say, like in the question, what visual represents this decimal. And so, you know, if it's whole numbers, this is tens. But in decimals, it's going to be tenths. So that will be right there. Okay? And then I tell my students, well, if you have 5 pennies, what do you know about that? And they'll say, well, 1 penny is 1 cent. Now I'm going to go ahead and show you what 1 cent looks like, because I want you to make sure you understand the difference. A dime is this, 10 cents. That's 1/10, because that's in the tenths place. That's 1/100ths, because it's in the hundredths place. So they tell me, well, 1 cent or 1 penny is 1/100th of $1. So that's why for this place value, we use this to represent it, okay? Because 100 of these makes 1 of these. Think of this as your dollar. Think of this as your ones place, okay? I know that's really strange. So like, let me go back a step real quick. Let me fix this. Okay, think of this for a second. This is 1, okay? In my other lessons, I told you that this is 1, okay? But now since we're going into decimals, you're going into numbers that are less than 1. So if I took this as representing 1, and I'm trying to show what's less than 1, I have to, you know, physically cut these to show you that, you know, oh, 10 pieces can be... This can be cut into 10 pieces. This can be cut into 100 pieces. So then for decimals, we think of this as a temporary like replacement of this for the $1. Okay? So this is my ones place when it's regarding decimals. Okay? And then these are my dimes, because 10 dimes make $1. All right, 10 of these make $1. So that's why this is called tenths. And then 100 of these make $1. 100 cents make $1. So if I were to, you know, have 100 of these, then they would all fit. So that's why this is the hundredths block. So this is what we would call 10 cents. And so you can also... Oops, sorry. You can also think of this with 0 hundredths place, and you know, that's still basically 10 cents. We call it 1/10, okay? And if there's a 0, then you say 10 hundredths. But essentially, you know, it's still 1 dime. It's still 10 cents. So then when you compare it with this, okay, this is 1 cent or 1/100th. So this is more than this. This is this, okay? And then this, when it's in the hundredths place, you're even smaller. And you know what? When you get to this, the thousandths, it's this. But this is like tiny. You know, this is dimes, pennies, and this is like, you know, a penny cut up into 1,000 pieces or something like that. Like, it's very, very small. So the farther you go down the decimal line, the decimal place value, the smaller the value of that number is. So when you have something here and nothing here and nothing here but something here, this has more value because this is the tenths place. Just think more dimes and think of this as pennies. Okay, so I'm going to go through some visual models for each one so you can see what they look like. And I'm going to talk about strategies on how to compare decimals. Okay, so let's look at this one. Because it's in the tenths place, you have to say 4/10. And so you would have 4 of these to represent it. Okay? I like to always kind of turn these around because it's only tenths. We don't want to see the little pieces in there. We're trying to think of just sticks. And so your picture would look like this. This is your visual model. I have 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 out of 10. So I have 4 dimes. So it's like 4/10 or 40 cents, you know, money-wise when you think of it that way. Okay? So then let's look at another one. All right. Let's look at this one. So this one is 7/10 because I have 7 out of 10 shaded in. That's why it's called tenths, because these are in tenths. I'm going to keep emphasizing that throughout the video. I just want you to see what the difference is. See, this is cut in hundredths. This is tenths. So when I give my decimal name for this, it has to have tenths at the end. When I give my decimal name for this, hundredths will be at the end because this is cut into hundredths. Okay? So when we're comparing decimals, both visuals are the same and they're both in the same place value. Like 4/10 compared to 7/10. What a joke. So easy. Here's 7/10, here's 4/10. Just by looking at how much is colored in, you can tell 7/10 is greater. So as far as answering the question, okay, so let's look at 5/10 and 8/10. So here is the visual for 8/10 and here is the visual for 5/10. Just by looking at it, you can tell 8/10 covers more on a, you know, essentially a whole or $1 versus 5/10. So 8/10 is greater than 5/10. 4/10, I have visuals for that. This is 6/10. This is 4/10. As you can tell, 6/10 covers more than 4/10. So that one wins. Then we have 3/10 versus 9/10. I don't know if I can find my 9/10 visual. Here we go. Right there. So as you can see, 9/10 covers more. And then 1/10 versus 5/10. Oh, yeah, that's 5/10. 5/10 covers more. And then we have 6/10 again versus 7/10. So I'm just going to show you like that you can see 7/10 covers more. So sometimes kids get a little confused. I'm going to go ahead and tell you what a good strategy would be. Although on these it's pretty easy, but just for future notice. In decimals, you're always allowed to put little zeros at the end because you're just saying that there's 0 hundredths in that place value. That's all it is. Now that does change the picture. If you were to, if you were told to tell us, you know, which picture represents 6/10, you have to pick the one that shows tenths in it. But for you, you can put a 0 at the end when you're doing comparisons, okay? But if they give it to you in the tens place, you have to pick the picture that has tenths in it, okay? But you're allowed to put zeros when you're comparing and adding and subtracting and things like that. So let's move on to hundredths. So right here we have 5 hundredths. So that's like 5 of these, 5 pennies. Remember, these are pennies because 100 pennies make a whole. And so this is my visual for 5 hundredths. Okay, when you have 5 cents, that's what it represents. 5 cents out of 100 cents. Okay, so let's look at an example in hundredths, another example so we can compare. Looking at my pictures here for hundredths. Let's see. Okay, I like this one. I like this because it brings up a good point. Remember how I told you in the last video that if it ends in the tenths place, then you have to use the tenths picture. But if it ends in the hundredths place, that changes the picture. So this is 50 hundredths. Think of 50 cents in pennies only. Okay? So this represents 50 hundredths. Now, if this did not exist, then it would be this one. Okay? But because they gave us a question with the 0 hundredths, that means it's cut into hundredths. 50 hundredths out of 100 pieces. So in this situation, using visuals, I can tell this is more than this. Okay? So my answer would be 50 hundredths is greater than 5 hundredths. Now, I want to also show you something else. Suppose you're given this. I just showed you that the picture is different. This is the picture for 5 tenths. Okay? This is the picture for 5 hundredths. 5 tenths is still more than 5 hundredths. And I want you to notice something here. Do you see how these two line up? They're exactly the same value-wise, money value-wise. So I was telling you earlier, like suppose, you know, you're given it in tenths. When you're comparing, you're allowed to put like a little 0 there to help you compare. And so it lets you know that it's like 50 cents versus 5 cents. And so you're able to pick the one with the greater value. So like if you've seen my videos on comparing whole numbers, I always tell you to line them up according to place value. So like if you were to write this, like if this is how you were given the question, okay, and you were to write this one on top of the other, it's kind of hard to compare because there's like, there is a missing piece. You're allowed to put zeros when it's decimals because you're just saying that there's 0 hundredths there. You're just doing that for that purpose. And so now it's so much easier. I'm like, oh, that's like 50 cents and that's like 5 cents. Well, 50 cents is more than 5 cents, so 5 tenths is greater than 5 hundredths. Okay? So make sure you really pay attention to that and put zeros where you need to put them and pay attention to what the picture would look like. Because your question might say, which of the following pictures best represents the decimals? So like let's say they already give you this and they say which shows 5 tenths greater than 5 hundredths. Well, you need to be aware that these are the pictures that represent it. Okay, so don't just rely on the 0. You've got to know, oh, that's in the tenths place, so I need a picture with tenths. That's in the hundredths place, I need a picture with hundredths. Or sometimes they might even, they might have it like this. Or actually, let's say they give it to you like that, and they have this as an answer choice. You can't pick this because they gave this to you in the tenths. This is the one that they want. All right, let's compare. So I have 75 hundredths. So because this ends in the hundredths place, my picture has to be cut up into 100 pieces. So this is what the picture looks like. I'm also going to go ahead and tie in fractions just so you can see the connection. So it's 75 hundredths. So because I said hundredths, my fraction has to have 100 underneath. And so then here is the other one. This is 7/10. 7/10, because it ends in the tenths place, has to be cut into 10 pieces. And so here's the picture for 7/10. The fraction, I'm going to go ahead and rewrite that other one again. So 75 hundredths, 7/10. The fraction for that looks like that. So obviously we can't compare the fractions. We have to do the whole common, least common multiple and stuff like that. But I just wanted you to see that that's what the fractions look like. So here's my picture, 7/10. Now if you put them right on top of each other, from here down it matches. But notice the 75 hundredths has 5 hundredths more. Okay, so remember I told you in my last video, when you're comparing, for comparison's sake, you're allowed to put like a little magic 0 there to help you compare. So it's like saying I have 7/10 and 0 hundredths. And that's what makes the difference right here. I have nothing here. I have no little hundredths in that. But in this one I do. I have 5 hundredths. So that's why 75 hundredths is more. And if you treat it like money, this is like 70 cents. Think of it as 70 cents and 75 cents. And so 75 cents is greater. Okay, so let's look at another one. We have 90 hundredths. Even though there's a 0 in the hundredths place, this is the way the number is given. You have to say 90 and then the place value, the last digits in. So 90 hundredths. So my picture will have 100 pieces and 90 out of 100 will be shaded in. So that's what the picture looks like. My next number that I want to compare with is 9/10. Because it stops in the tenths place and there's nothing here, I have to treat it like it's like there's no hundreds place. So 9/10. So my picture will have 10 pieces and look like this. Now, what do you notice here? Even though one is in tenths and one is in the hundreds place, they are exactly the same amount shaded in. Okay? You need to think of it as like there are 10 things to color and they both colored up to 9. And so it's equivalent. These two decimals are equivalent, even though one is in the hundreds place and one's in the tenths place. Remember, I told you, when you're comparing, you're allowed to put these magic zeros there because you're just saying, hey, I have 0 hundredths. And so they are exactly the same. And so you put an equal sign instead. The fraction for the first one is 9/10. Fraction for the second is 90 hundredths. Okay, let me go ahead and address something that I need to talk about so you don't get confused. This is 90 hundredths, and then this is 9 hundredths. These are very, very different decimals. This is obviously still that. I don't know if I have a visual that shows 9 hundredths. I'm just going to take a 10 hundredths and cross that out. So just, pretend that doesn't exist. Look at the difference. That's 9 out of 100 shaded in. That's 90 out of 100 shaded in. So a lot of students, like, they just see the 9 and they think, oh, it's exactly the same. But you know what? When you line it up and treat it like money, you'll notice, oh, that's 9 cents. That's 90 cents. Well, 90 cents is way more than 9 cents. So be aware of the place value and definitely look at the pictures. If it ends in the hundredths place, your picture has to have 100. If it ends in the tenths place, your picture has 10 pieces. Okay, I wanted to address something real quick before you do your checkpoint questions. I just took 3 decimals in different place values and different pictures so you can see the difference between all of them. So when you read this, this ends in the hundredths place, so it's 1/100th, which means my picture has to have 100 pieces and 1 out of 100 is shaded in because it's 1/100th. So my fraction would be 1 over 100. Look at this one. This only is in the tenths place, so that's 1/10th, which means my picture needs to have 10 pieces and 1 out of 10 is shaded in. And so my fraction will be 1 over 10. Notice 1/10th is greater than 1/100th. Okay, remember we talked about that magic 0 right there. So it's like 10 cents versus 1 cent. Or think of it like a coloring contest. This is colored more than that one, so 1/10th is greater than 1/100th. And then this one ends in the hundredths place, so I have to say 10 hundredths, which means my picture is, because I'm finishing in the hundredths place, my picture has to be 100 pieces and 10 out of 100 are shaded in. So then my fraction will be 10 over 100. And these two are equivalent. These two are equivalent. And then these two are greater than that one. So really be careful and pay attention to the decimals. I'm going to write all of them right here so you can see. And then I'm going to put like a little dotted magic 0 right there. So 1 cent is less than 1/10th, and 1 cent is also less than 10 hundredths. Okay, I want you to do these 4 questions before I move on and do comparing and ordering. Ordering. So I want you to write the symbol in the middle, and as evidence, I want you to draw sticks and X's as visuals for each decimal. Press pause, work the problems, press play when you're ready to check. Okay, so let's look at each one. 42 hundredths, because that ends in the hundredths place. So we're going to just pretend each stick has 10, 20, 30, 40, and then 2 hundredths. And then this is 4/10ths, so 10, 20, 30, 40, or 1, 2, 3, 4/10ths. So this one clearly has more than that one, and remember we can do the magic 0, 42 cents, and 40 cents. This one is greater. So 6 hundredths, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then 6/10ths, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 6. Sorry, let's just do it this way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So 6/10ths is more than 6 hundredths. All right, since I'm getting used to this, I can put a 0 here and know that these are equal. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then, 50 of these, which would make 5 rows, so that's equal. And then 8/10ths, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then 81 hundredths. So imagine these are all filled with X's. I can't make 81 X's like that. That's going to take forever. So this is barely larger than this one. If you think about it, it's like 80 cents versus 81 cents. So that one is greater. Okay, now we're going to be ordering decimals. And it's really the exact same process. Look at the visual, make sure it matches up, draw visuals to help you, and then just put them in order. And make sure you put them on top of each other and put zeros where necessary. So let's look at the first one, 62 hundredths. So there is my visual for that. The next one is 6/10ths. There's my visual for that. And then the last one is 65 hundredths. There's my visual for that. Now, it's kind of hard to tell, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to put them right above each other, and then you can see which one is colored in more. So looking at this one is colored in the least, because this one has a whole line longer, or a whole line extra, and this has a little bit extra. So this is the least. And then looking at this one has 2 pieces here and this one has 5. So then this would be next, and then this one would be next. So there's that. So this would be first as least, then this, then this. Now, we do need to get used to not using visuals, or sometimes it can get confusing. So always remember, you can complete this exact same question by listing them like this. And then just put your magic zeros in, and know that the first is the same. And then you go to the next and notice that this one is the smallest of the 3, so that would be first. That's the next smallest, and then that's the next smallest. It's just like comparing and ordering whole numbers. If you saw my video up about that, I always tell you start with the greatest, highest place value. And in this situation, it would be the tenths, because tenths is greater than hundreds, so you always start on the left. And so then, you know, it's just like treating it like whole numbers. That would be first, that would be second, that would be third. Or treat it like money. 62 cents, 60 cents, or 65 cents. Okay, let's look at least to greatest with something in the ones place. Now, at the very beginning of part 1 of my video, I said that the ones place is like one of these, because we are using that original ones block. Like if it was whole numbers, then this would be the ones place. Like this would be a ones block. But because we're going into decimals, and decimals are slowly getting, like they get smaller, they're smaller than a whole number, we have to replace this with this as like one whole. And we treat it like a dollar. We think of it as a dollar because 100 of these make a dollar, and so this is the perfect representation for one whole. So when you're using visuals, here's what it would look like. So let's look at 1 3/10. So here's 1 whole and 3/10. That's how you read it. The other one was 1 3/100. Because it's 300s, I have to use the hundreds block. So 1 3/100. And then the last one was 1 33/100. So it's this, and then 10, 20, 30, 31, 32, 33. Okay, so looking at this, you can see that this has the least amount of blocks. This is like $1.03. 1 3/100. So this is the least. Then between these two, they both have 1, they both have 3, but this has 3/100 more than this one. So then when I order these in order, it's this one first, then this one, remember my magic 0, and then this one. And I said this one, based on pictures, has 3/100 more than that one. So we can always subtract just to quickly see. And you put zeros when you have to subtract if there's an empty spot. You get, you get 3/100. So that difference is what made one greater than the other. And by the way, I forgot to share in the other clips, is like if you have this, you can put a 0 there if you want. They both are exactly the same thing. In here, you're just saying, I have 0 ones. And so it's just an extra thing. It won't affect anything. They're both equal.